Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Edge of the Universe, our mini conference in the middle of the year for life, the universe, and everything. We're happy that you're here. You are watching our first presentation in Dragon Room with Will Munn from Adept Icarus. He's going to be talking about publishing tabletop role-playing games. If you would like to join in on the chat for this and ask questions to Will, then we invite you to join our Discord, and the link for that is in the description of this video. We will be in the Dragon chat is where you'll find us, and we'll be watching for questions and things like that in there. We're glad you're here, and we hope to see you all in February, where at our live LTUE in Provo. Early registration is now open for that. Just to introduce Will Munn is the award-nominated and best-selling creator of Arium, the world-building RPG. He runs Adept Icarus, the game design studio, and has collaborated on RPGs such as Cold Shadows, Tiny Frontiers, and Zorro, the role-playing game. Will also serves as a publisher for multiple award-winning and best-selling game designers. All 4 continental U.S. time zones have been his home, but he's never moved without his towel. Welcome, Will. We're glad you're here with us, and we'll leave it to you to take away.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Well, welcome, folks. As you can see, I have the best, most interesting, most exciting opening slide for all of you today. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you just take a second and soak it in and realize its beauty. But we're going to get past that really quick. So thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to maybe tell you some stuff that's not in the bio for a second. First and foremost, I am a person who is not afraid to be featured in silly photographs and videos, as you can see. I am, as mentioned, the founder of the Adept Icarus game design and publishing studio. And over the years, I have been involved in a lot of TTRPG projects at varying levels of sort of participation. Early on, I did a little bit of writing, and then later I started getting more involved in things. For example, with the Zorro role-playing game, I co-produced that. It was published by Gallant Knight Games. I got the opportunity to write the initial outline for this whole book. I managed a team of writers that worked on it, did quite a bit of writing myself, maybe around 20% of the book, helped with art selection and a lot more things. This was very, very helpful for me because while this campaign was going on, I was actually starting to work on Arium. And Arium is the first thing that Adept Icarus published solo. And so we had a lot of great response from Kickstarter when we did a crowdfunding campaign for this. We had, we've overfunded by over 1,000, 2,000%, something like that. I did more work in this line of games than anything previous. So the work that I did in Zorro really helped me to prepare so I could pick up a few new things that I didn't already know how to do, figure them out, and then move on to learning more things. So part of what happened here is, I did game design, art direction, published these games, did fulfillment, distribution, like all of it. So that is what's going on there. So then last winter in December, in fact, I picked up another game for Adept Icarus. So this is a game that was designed and created by another TTRPG creator, and publishing this through Adept Icarus for them. So now we're publishing other people's work. We're publishing things that I've worked on, and also had a really successful crowdfunding campaign for this one as well. It's fulfilled digitally, and we're currently working through the physical fulfillment. So that's the next step. Also, we've been taking our games on the road to conventions and events nationwide. We've shipped games to over 40 countries on 6 continents. But where did it all start? So the year was 1994. I was sitting on an old couch in a garage with 2 of my friends talking about RPG rules and the epic weekend-long session that we had just finished. playing role-playing games. It was definitely Dungeons and Dragons, and we dreamed of how we could somehow get involved in the creative process of making role-playing games. Unfortunately, much like the art of MC Escher, it seemed very impossible. And this was, I'm using this art because it was of the time. I discovered MC Escher in the 90s, and I thought, wow, like, where do you start? Where's the beginning? And that's what it felt like trying to think about getting involved in publishing and creating TTRPGs at that time. It seemed like an impossible dream. And no matter how long I stared at and played the other games that were available at that time, and I played a lot of different things from a broad variety of genres, publishers, designers, I couldn't wrap my head around where to get started. And so let's get out of the past. Let's use our 90s technology to fast forward to the future, and let's talk about today, where with the world of ubiquitous internet, crowdfunding, and ebooks. In short, everything about publishing TTRPGs has changed since that time. So anything you can imagine can be done. You can use Affinity and Adobe suites for desktop publishing, design, and digital art. You can use itch.io, DriveThruRPG, Amazon, your own website to sell products that you've created. And you can find and collaborate with writers, designers, editors, illustrators, graphic designers, sensitivity consultants, art directors, crowdfunding consultants, marketing professionals, small business advisors, and much, much more. You can find them all at the tip of your fingertips. So things have changed, I guess, is the best way to say that. So what I want to say for just a second, let's do a quick record scratch. In case you're here and you have designed a game and you want a publisher to notice you, pick up your game, sell your game, that's not really what I'm planning to go over here today. I will provide some notes at the end of the session of like publishers you could potentially reach out to, or also some groups that you might join where you can learn more about that. But the main focus of the topic today is actually doing the work of publishing TTRPGs, whether an indie publishing your own thing or doing the slightly larger work of becoming a small press and producing things for other people. We're going to talk about some of those things. But I will say, if you want a publisher to notice you, talk to them. They are mostly nice people. And I think you'll find if you run across a game that you like and you try and contact the person who published that game, they will probably respond to you. It's a good group of folks in my experience. So start there. But let's move on to talking about publishing TTRPGs. So, you excited? I'm going to tell you the best kept secret in tabletop role-playing publishing right now. So I hope you have your pencils, no pens, because you need to be able to erase it in case I'm wrong. But hope you have your pencils ready. Here we go. Less is more. This is the biggest secret. Start with something that you know, add something that you don't know, and repeat. And keep building. Make that process iterative so that you're always continuing to improve on what you've done before and learning a little bit more about it as you go. So what does that mean? Maybe you are a web design professional. Maybe you know a lot about web design. Maybe you have started a lot of startups and you know about businesses and creating LLCs. Or maybe you've worked in an industry where you know about international manufacturing and supply chains. Should you start there? Well, maybe not. The best place to start is with a game. You have to have a game. It doesn't have to be a game that you wrote, but you do have to have a game. So don't start with a custom website. Don't spend your time focusing on your social media presence or any number of other mistakes that I actually personally made at multiple points along the way. Instead, take the time to make sure that you have a game. A game does not have to be complicated. I'm going to get into that more in a second. But we're going to take this approach of talking about publishing tabletop role-playing games in two steps. We're going to take a now approach, and we're also going to talk about a later approach, right? So back to the trick that I mentioned earlier, there's two ways to apply it. The first is the simplest and most immediate way, right? How do I get something published now? And the second is from a more advanced perspective. Hey, maybe you've already done some of the beginning steps. Maybe you already have some knowledge in some areas that can be helpful to you. What else do you need to know? And for what do you need to know it? So we'll get into some of those things. But let's talk about the now, or approach one, as I'm calling it here. This is the minimalist approach. So write something, and by write something, I mean anything. Or take something someone else has written that they want you to publish for them and work with that. Keep it short. Don't write a 500-page manual, right? Something reasonable. Something maybe less than 40 pages, right? Maybe less than 10 pages. Who knows? Maybe it's a complete RPG in 200 words or less. There's actually a competition for this out there that you can find if you search for it. It's pretty interesting. Some of the games that come out of that are actually very, very fun. But maybe it's not a complete RPG. Maybe it is an NPC or an enemy combatant for your favorite open licensed game. Something like 5e or Year Zero Engine or Morkborg or Pick Your Poison, right? Write the thing, and then we'll go to the next step. Additionally, it doesn't have to be something so exact as one of those things. It could be an in-world recipe for, something like you would see in a dungeon or at a feast in the world that you're representing, or the steps to a dance, or how to get a business license and build a web page in world. It doesn't really matter. It can be anything, but keep it short, export it to a PDF, publish it on itch.io, and then tell people about it, or don't, right? You can tell people about it, and that's good. Some things might get discovered anyway if you put them out on a platform. So alternatively, you can join a game jam on itch.io. So what the heck is that? Well, it is not something you scrape from between the toes of gamers. A game jam is, it's more of a guided approach. So let me tell you a little bit about this. So it all but guarantees you some level of feedback on your publication, which is really valuable and sometimes hard to get. Game jams on itch.io are structured around a core idea or a set of rules. People who host the jams, and it's because someone has to host one, they will usually at least read every entry. They're often time limited, and this is kind of that sounds a little scary, but it's actually kind of nice as well, because you're not going to overproduce something for a game jam, most likely, right? You're going to produce something that meets what they were asking for, and then you'll have a finished thing of some sort at the end of it. That is really a great trick, and it's one of the mantras, I think, of game design and publishing, is that some words are better than no words at all, always. And it's the same thing with writing novels or stories or anything. Some words are better than no words. You can always edit some words. You can't edit no words. And I will say, publishers as a whole, indie, small press, or large press, they like feedback. especially early on in the process. The earlier you can get the feedback, the better. We need it. So show something to people that maybe isn't all the way ready, a finished product yet. Publish it so that you can get that feedback early. Uh, so you might be saying, but Will, I'm not ready to share my ideas with the world yet. No, no, I do not want to publish it. Not yet, not until it's perfect. Well, that's okay. Itch.io has some functionality that can be very helpful to you. First off, you can always just make it a draft, right? You can push something out there and only you are going to be able to see it. You can also make it restricted so that only the owners of the content plus people you've specifically authorized can view it and download it. And then you can go further and you can break that emergency glass and make it public anytime you want. And the great thing about it is you can do that anytime as soon as it's there. There are also a ton of release statuses, and this is pretty key. So people who are looking at your game, if it is in a public status or if it's in a unknown status, can know basically where is it and should they expect it to be perfect, or should they expect that, hey, this is a prototype, this is just something that I threw together that I wanted to see how it would work and get some feedback on it. Or is it something that's in active development that you're working to get to a point where you can release it as a product? And the final thing that's really cool about itch.io is that you can decide what to charge for your work or not to charge for your work. That's also a possibility. You can open it up for donations and you can tell people, hey, we're working on this, we want to improve it, we want to order better art for it, we want to do more, we want to hire a layout artist, we want to, hire an editor, someone who really can hone the words and make them fantastic. So what you can do is you can set it up for donation, you can make it just a paid product, or you can say, hey, I'm not accepting any payments on this, but let me just say that Ben Franklin says that you should charge a fair price for your work. You did that work, and you should charge a fair price for it. And then once it's out there and people can download it, then you, my friends, are now an indie RPG publisher. It really is that simple. I bet some of you could be indie RPG publishers today if you start now after you finish any LTUE sessions that you're going to watch. Just one caveat, I think the itch.io approach is the simplest way to do this. I'm aware that for beginning indie publishing and getting feedback on your work and everything is really can be scary, but this is a great way to do it in a pretty safe space. And if you want, you can just create an account, make it completely anonymous, name it something that no one can associate with you, and you can get feedback completely anonymously. You don't have to tie it to yourself or anything. There are other options to become published with your first TTRPG. I don't plan to go into a lot of detail on them, but there are plenty of other ways you can do it. You could you could just post it on your social media, right? You could just post a file up on social media. You could post it on DriveThruRPG, also a possibility. The tools aren't quite as good for this particular case, although it is very good for some other things. There are a lot of ways that you can go about it. But I think this is a good point to basically finish with the simple approach and move on to talk about our later, right? So maybe you have a game that you've been working on for a long time. Well, actually, let's stop for a second. And are there any questions about the simple approach? Looks like there's one in the chat in Discord says, are there communities on itch.io? Is it a social site and a storefront? And I don't know that I can completely answer that, but I do know that you can follow publishers on itch.io, so it does have some of that social aspect to it. It is also a storefront, but you can follow different publishers. You can follow each other basically, and you can also when you participate in a game jam, you see the different people who are participating in the game jam, and you can see their submissions. So there's quite a bit there from that aspect. But I wouldn't say I don't think it supports making like just posts about X, Y, or Z. People are usually going to another platform for that, like, X or Blue Sky or Threads or Facebook or wherever they're going, right? There are some communities on Facebook or Facebook groups that you can potentially join, and there are also quite a few of them on Discord, where you can find other people who are doing publishing of RPGs. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Are there any other questions about the initial sort of simple, let's get something published today approach? Okay. Great. Well, let's move on to the later then. So again, maybe you've got a game you've been working on for a long time. Maybe you have a particular set of skills and your friends want you to help them publish their game because maybe you already know how to do graphic design, and maybe you've run a Kickstarter for something that didn't have anything to do with RPGs, or, who knows? Who knows? So let's talk about that. So the trick that I mentioned earlier still applies. The approach is that's really a core building block of everything that I'm going to talk about today. There are a lot of ways to tackle learning something new about publishing. My preferred, and maybe the only way that really works for me, my preferred way is to find something that I'm not that great at, but could be better, and do a lot of it until I get better at it. An example is art direction and working with artists. So I have an upcoming game called Vi, and Vi has 22 different realms that are vastly different from each other. And we decided pretty early on that we would have, and this is leaning into the pain. We decided that we would have a different artist for every realm and do it sort of Spider-Verse style, right? So every single realm has a completely different artist. They're making their own art for each thing. And so I went from working on Arium, where it took me over a year, maybe a year and a half, to select and commission and receive cover art for the Arium books, which was honestly one of the most painful processes ever, because I'd never done it before. I had no idea where to start, and it was just really challenging. To a point where I said, well, maybe with some more practice I can get better at this. And so we're working with 22 artists. I think 17 of them have already submitted their final versions of their first piece, and it was a little difficult at first, I will admit, but it's pretty cool. So why am I doing that? Well, let's be honest, right? I will never be illustrating Adept Icarus games because I am not an artist. And no matter how many years I put into learning to be an artist, I will never be as good as someone else who I can license or commission art like this, from someone whose experience is in art. So you have to have the self-awareness to know your limits, right? But I can become much better at working with artists, commissioning artists, getting the art that I want from artists. And so that's the skill set that I've been focusing on and getting better at. It's always better to hire a pro, and your game will be better for it, for sure. If you can afford to hire a pro. A little caveat. We'll get into that more later as well. So maybe you heard an implied fourth item in our like easy like repetition thing here. I hope you did, because collaboration with other people is critical to publishing. I don't know anyone who can do all of the things relating to publishing on their own. So part of this is a skill in management. You have to develop and work on that skill a little bit as well. There's a comment in the chat about loving my art. I'm sorry, nope. Anyway, the art that John did is amazing, though. I love this. Okay, so let's talk about some of the different skills that are needed in order to do a lot of the things associated with publishing. Oh boy, that's a big wall of text, and you probably can't read it all. And I don't expect you to read it all. I'm going to go into it. I'm going to break it down a little bit, and we'll talk about it. If you see something on here and you say, hey, I want to know more about this, then these are good things to put in questions in the chat. Like, I will dig in more deeply on any of the topics here for anyone who would like to, but also I want to keep this helpful for the people who are watching. So I'm not going to go over all of them in detail because we don't have that kind of time today. But I do want to leave space to talk about the ones that people who are watching are interested in. So we'll get to more of that in a second. So first off, just remember, you don't have to do all of these things right away. And do what you're confident in. Pick one new thing to learn on each iteration. So do the things that you already know how to do, right? And then just find something that you're interested in that you think you could get better at, and practice that and work on it. And then when you feel confident in your ability to do that, pick up something new. That's it. It's pretty simple. So gain knowledge. Keep going. So let's talk about some of the things that are necessary for digital and physical publication. Again, no one knows all of this. I don't know all of this. I know a lot of it, and I know people who can help me with things that I am not able to do myself. So first column here, we've got learning industry, the TTRPG industry, and testing the market. So there are a few things. I think it's very valuable to know the history of TTRPGs. I don't think you have to know the history of TTRPGs, but I do think it's very valuable. And there are some good books out there. They're available, I think, both in PDF and in audiobook on Audible about the history of TTRPGs, and I'm blanking on the title right now. I'm kind of riffing on that a little bit, so I'll find it and I can put it in the chat. But they are they're focused on a decade, and so they have one from the 1970s, and they talk about all the companies that were founded during that decade. And so the one in the 70s talks about TSR, the original creator of Dungeons and Dragons. They talk about Chaosium, the people who make Call of Cthulhu, King Arthur Pendragon, RuneQuest, right? And they talk about all of the other companies that were founded in the 70s and their full history. And up until like 2015 or something like that is when this was all published. So it's complete up to that point. And then they go on and they have another book for the 80s, and it does the same approach, which is really fascinating. I have not read or listened to all of them yet, but I did finish the one from the 70s recently. And it was very eye-opening. I learned a couple of things that I had no idea that were helpful to me today, now. So know about the industry, know about where it's come from, and then you also need to understand where it's going. And there are some different ways to do that, but one of them is, like get your hands on some different games, right? Get your hands on some games. Um, Watch people who are crowdfunding games and understand the market of people who are crowdfunding games and what they like to back. Obviously, everybody likes to back Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere game, right? I mean, no question there. But there are a lot of other very successful TTRPGs on Kickstarter, on BackerKit, on other platforms for crowdfunding, and you can see kind of what people gravitate towards and what they don't. So if financial success is part of your goal, you need to figure out, like, is there something here that I love that I could make that other people will also love? And that's part of it, right? But you always need to focus on what you love, because if you're making something that you don't love, then or publishing something that you don't love, then you're going to run out of steam, and you won't want to do all of the things that are related to publishing that. You will absolutely, absolutely, it'll become a slog. It'll be miserable. Don't do that. Only work on things you love. The next section here is to decide what are you going to create? What will you collaborate on? What do you need to hire? What can you license from other people? And what do you need to buy outright? Right. So are you building a game system from scratch? Maybe you are, right? And that's a pretty ambitious undertaking. Having done it a few times now, I'll say it's an ambitious undertaking, right? And you need to do a lot of playtesting when you do something like that. If you're using someone's open license rules and maybe modifying it a little bit and making some changes, like that can be easier. But also, some of the licensed game sets out there are enormous. And so even though there's already a framework in place, do you want to release a game that you must have a 200-page manual for, or it won't work because it doesn't implement all the stuff that is in the open licensed rules? So there's a trade-off there that you need to be considering, right? So if you are going to do open licensed rules, I recommend, at least in the beginning, pick something that is more compact, right? Something that doesn't need you to write an entire monster manual or, 50 pages of how do I run this at my tabletop, right? Go with something that's a little more succinct if you can. But also, who are you going to collaborate with? Is there someone that a friend of yours? I saw a question about this in chat. I'm going to review it really quick. It says, do you just start collaborating with friends, or do you meet people at conventions and stuff? Great question. Both. So I think like minds, right? Some of my best collaborators are people who I knew outside of working in games. But I also collaborate with people who I've met over time. And that has also been really great. So it just depends, I guess. Depends on who you know that might be interested. Figure out how you can compensate them, right? Some people will be okay with a profit share type of arrangement. Other people will want, payment for work completed. There's a lot of different ways to approach this. I could talk about that for a long time, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on and talk about playtesting. So let's talk about playtesting. Do this as early as you possibly can. You don't have to have a complete game to playtest. You can have a complete piece. And you say, okay, me and myself and I I'm going to sit down and I will test this out. And whether it's dice rolls, whether it's, pulling cards from a deck, whether it's like how does combat work, whether it's, just like how do I construct a narrative, like all of that. Sit down and spend some time just trying it. It doesn't have to be done. If you've got some friends that'll do this with you, even better, right? Or if you have a collaborator who's working on an entire project with you, then that works really well too. Very, very well, I would say, actually. I think I've discovered my favorite way to work personally, but I like spending time face to face with people working on stuff together where everybody sees the same thing and works on the same stuff. But that's a whole nother talk. Anyway, expand your playtest circle as the game matures, right? So as you have enough down that you think, hey, I could just run a game session for my friends with this now. Do that right away as soon as you feel like you can do that. In fact, that's a great early goal, is to say, I just want to get enough of this down that I know I can run a full game session. So I'm going to have that as a goal and then run one game session and see how it goes. Continue to build on that. Ultimately, your goal with playtesting is to get your manuscript or whatever, maybe a laid out version if you're a layout artist and you can lay things out as you write them, but maybe just a Word doc or something, or a Google Doc. Get it to a point where you can hand it to someone and they can take it and run it with a group and they have never had any explanation from you. That's your end state of playtesting, but you don't have to be anywhere near that end state in order to start playtesting. Start early. Keep doing it as you go along until you get to that end state. And once you get to that state and you're getting back pretty positive feedback, your game's done. It's ready, right? Go. Okay. Then we'll talk about art decisions. So art is interesting because, like I said, either you're probably an illustrator or you aren't, right? There aren't a lot of people who can build and develop that talent and also publish and write games and do that. They're out there and they are unicorns. Incredible talent. But most people, in my experience, can't do both. And so you have to figure out, where does the money come from, right? Especially if you're making a digital only product, maybe you're not going to do even crowdfunding for it. You're just going to make something and you want to get enough art in it that you can interest people in it. Maybe you want a nice cover. Maybe you want a great logo. Maybe you want a few pieces inside to kind of keep people's interest as they're looking through. If you have the funds and you can afford to commission art, that might be a thing that you could consider. But I also would suggest using stock art. Find stock art that fits close enough to the theme that you want, or, maybe scribble some stuff together like that image that I showed earlier to get the point across, and work with that until you either get enough sales that you can commission art that you love, or get to a point where you say, hey, I think the interest in this is enough that I can crowdfund it and be successful and come away with enough money that it will cover my costs. But don't get a loan. Don't get a business loan to make a game. That's my personal opinion, but I don't think it's a good business decision. All right. So, and then the last section here for digital and physical publication is you have to do the finish work. So the finish work is, it needs to be edited. Someone needs to read all of this that has an eye for it, that did not write it, plain and simple. You may also benefit from sensitivity consulting, depending on your topic and whatnot and your comfort level there. I think most people benefit from some sensitivity consultation. It's not super expensive, actually. And so I would recommend doing some of that. And then also, who's doing the layout? Maybe you have skill in this and you can do the layout yourself. But if not, who's doing the layout and how much should you pay and things like that. And knowing market rates for these things is you can find data out there. Some of it's a little bit outdated. Most of it's, like within the last 4 years, you can find quite a bit of stuff. There are things within the last year or two as well. So keep an eye on how old it is, what you're looking at, but knowing rates that you should pay for this type of work is important. And always pay fair rates. I think that's really vital. All right. Before I move on to the physical side, let's take a second and see if there are any questions about sort of the things that are definitely required for digital publication. Yeah.
So there's a question
Yeah.
about games centered around an IP. Can you make games in worlds like that are in specific IPs without getting in trouble? Was there a license for Zorro you had to get?
Yeah.
Do they make
Yeah,
more
there was a
money than original
license.
games? Stuff like that.
It's a great question. The answer is it depends. I think licensed games can absolutely make. I mean, you can look at Cosmere, you can look at Avatar: The Last Airbender. There are other licensed properties out there that are record breaking, right? They have made the most money of any, RPGs in terms of crowdfunding, at least. I think, we all know that Dungeons and Dragons makes far more than any of them, and Pathfinder too, I think. But there are a lot of licensed IPs out there that do very well. Now, there is a lot of nuance to working on a licensed IP, and Zorro was licensed, so I do have direct experience with this. So, and I can't tell you like all the details of working with Zorro in particular, but I will tell you that if your goal is to get something published and to become good at publishing things, don't start with an IP. Start with your own stuff, right? And then move into IP once you've really gained a lot of these skills and you're very good at them. And then you'll be able to make great pitches to IPs that you love, and some of them will probably accept, right? And you can decide if it makes sense based on what terms that the two of you work out through negotiation, if you should pursue that or not, right? The amount that an IP will take, I mean, I would say anybody that's asking for more than 10% is probably asking too much, but some IPs will ask more than that. A lot of them have sales quotas that you're required to meet in order to continue to maintain the license. So you got to keep that into account as well. It's like units. So they're saying, hey, we want, 1,000 units sold every month or else the license is going to lapse. So there's a lot of things to consider with IP. I don't think I'll spend any more time on that. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the things that are required for physical publication. So how much do you need at a minimum to produce and fulfill physical products? This is something that you need to know. What's the funding level that's necessary in order to produce something? This is like 101 for producing physical products. It is homework and you must do it. You also should probably put some protections in place. I'm going to say right here and now, I am not an attorney. I am not an accountant. Do not take my advice on any of this stuff without consulting an attorney or an accountant. Thank you. Thank you for your time. For physical production, you need to decide what country you plan to print in. There are different trade-offs to consider based on where you print. If you print in the US, you'll get your products sooner, most likely, but they will probably cost more. If you print in China or Mexico, the products will take longer, but they will probably cost less. But you also usually have to have higher orders in order to print at shops like that. So a lot of places will let you, you can do print on demand through DriveThru RPG, or you can do like a print on demand publisher or print on demand printer like Lightning Source or Mixum or something like that. And you can order very small quantities if you want to. Of course, the margins get better the more and more that you print, but they'll let you print smaller quantities. But the big offset printers all are going to want you to do at least an order of 500 units or maybe 1,000. So you need to be prepared for that. They will also have different processes for how to proof what you're ordering. If you aren't comfortable with a digital proof, then make sure that you work with a printer who will ship you a physical proof copy of what it is that they're going to be making for you, so you can ensure that it's perfect before you order, thousands of them. From fulfillment, will you package and ship things yourself? If so, Pirate Ship is really nice. They do a great job with rates inside the U.S. and also their international shipping scheme is very, very nice. I can talk more about that if someone wants. And then distribution. How can you get your game into friendly local game stores and big conventions? Big convention booths can cost thousands of dollars. So probably when you're starting out, you'll want to piggyback either with another publisher or a group of publishers or some sort of organization that will help get your books out to these events. And then how can you get your books into other countries and languages? Also very, very something to consider. All right. All that said, you don't have to be an expert in all of these things to publish a TTRPG. I gave you the quick start version at the beginning. Just start making something. Find a partner to collaborate with. Seek out a mentor, join a professional organization, and keep learning something new, and you will get there. I'll take maybe how much time? We've got 3 minutes. Okay. If there are any other questions, feel free to put them in chat. I'm going to just start going through final slides, and I'll come back and answer them if there are any. So here are a couple of publisher resources. You can find the Utah RPG Creators Guild. There's a lot of local talent here for folks who are based in Utah. If you're not based in Utah, I think you could probably still join, but there's a Discord for this. It was started by the author Dan Wells back during last LTUE in February. And there's a good group of people in there, and some of them answer questions and things and whatnot. For a larger organization, IGDN they actually charge dues, so you're going to pay $100 in annual dues, but in my opinion, totally worth it. I am a member. It is a fully volunteer-run organization. They can get your games into multiple major conventions, and you don't have to pay anything extra, but they will take a percent to pay for the booths and stuff, and it depends on how well sales go as to what percent you get from your sales. I think from Gen Con earlier this month, I think the rate was the publishers got 55%, which is pretty common. Actually, that's more than you might get sometimes from something that's pushed into distribution. So we got 55% of our sales back, and then the other 45% helped pay for IGDN operations at Gen Con. So I think that's really worth it. There are also a wealth of experienced individuals who are members of this organization. There are over 100 different publishers that are members. They don't all do tabletop role-playing games, but I would say probably 70% are tabletop role-playing games, and some do card games, some do board games as well. But yeah. So that's publisher resources. And then we've got, if you're seeking a publisher, here are some resources for you. I promised that I would come back to this. So we've got, again, the Utah RPG Creators Guild, I think is a good place to go. You could play test your games at Unpub, which is at both PAX Unplugged and at Origins, which are two major East Coast conventions. You can go to Metatopia, which is entirely a playtesting convention. That's all they do there. And then the Gamma Expo also has a designer day. All of these publishers listed on the right are publishers who, well, most of them are members of the IGDN. Most of them have published, or I think all of them have published games written and designed by other game designers. So they are small presses that are occasionally looking for people. So you can find their website, you can look them up, find out, what type of games do they publish? What's their ethos? Like, would my game be a good fit? Maybe I'll reach out to them. Beyond that, you can look farther afield. There's Plus One EXP has a zine club where they publish zines. If you're doing 5e content, you can look at Cobalt Press, Mage Hand Press, DM Dave Publishing. Look at what is it that you're making and determine what makes sense. If you're making Cthulhu stuff, like talk to Pelgrane or Chaosium. Anyway. So the moral here is get off the couch in your garage. It all starts here today. In the mid-2010s, I was attending LTUE for the first time and writing stories and unfinished novels and wondering about my future. And today, I'm making games with friends and sharing them with the global community. And I've even been lucky enough to achieve many goals, including helping facilitate a room of nearly 100 people playing one of my games at LTUE last winter. Still get butterflies thinking about that. I'm out of time, huh? Just want one quick pitch. I am crowdfunding a Lonely Werewolf game in October. So watch out for that. It'll be on Kickstarter. And I've been Will.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
And I've played that game with you, and it's a great one. So excited for that. Everybody, if you'd like to get in touch with Will, his contact information is on the screen here. You can also chat with him more in the chat. We'd like to thank you for your presentation. That was amazing, good information for anybody who wants to be a game developer in the future. This is great. And that's what we're all about. Thank you very much. We'll appreciate it. For everybody, please stick around for our next session. We'll start at 12 o'clock with Dr. Paul Cox. He'll be talking about his top 10 sci-fi movies as seen through the eyes of an ethnobotanist, which should be very interesting. And please join our Discord, and you can find the link for that in the chat. Thank you again, Will. It's been great. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see you, everybody, in about 8 minutes. Bye. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our 12 o'clock hour. Today, at 12 o'clock here in the Dragon Room, we are hearing from Dr. Paul Allen Cox, who's going to be sharing with us his top 10 sci-fi movies that he enjoys. Dr. Paul Cox is an ethnobotanist. He was named one of Time Magazine's 11 Heroes of Medicine in recognition of his search in remote island villages for new medicines. And he was awarded the Goldman Environmental Prize, recognizing his establishment of Seacology, an island conservation charity in Berkeley. Dr. Cox received his PhD at Harvard and was then appointed as a Miller Fellow at the University of California, Berkeley. After serving as dean at BYU, he became the King Carl XVI Gustav Professor in Sweden. He leads the not-for-profit Brain Chemistry Labs in Jackson, Wyoming, searching for new treatments for ALS, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease. And we are grateful to have him on. He's been a guest with us before, and we are excited to hear from him again today. If you would like to chat with or ask questions of Dr. Cox, you can join our Discord chat by clicking the link in the description of this video. And we're excited to see you there. Thank you very much, Dr. Cox, for joining us, and take it away.
All of you for joining with me today. I have a very broad sense of science fiction. I'm not as acquainted as the audience is with science fiction films or literature, but if we can take Frankenstein as maybe one of the early science fiction novels, I don't necessarily view science fiction as dealing with space. I just see it as interesting fiction that has a science twist. So I'd like to go through 10 different films that, as an ethnobotanist, I found interesting, like to chat about. And there's a few honorable mentions that I won't go through very much, but I'm probably the only guy in North America that really likes the David Lynch version of Dune. Of course, this is based on some really interesting ecological concepts, which as a scientist, I find a little bit lacking. How do worms produce spice without intermediate steps? How do they go through such a viscous medium as sand, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's a tremendous film, and so I won't talk about that. Another one is E.T. The reason E.T. is of interest to me is that it answers a key question. I've always been bothered by science fiction films where aliens travel from distant galaxies to come eat us, because the caloric benefit of traveling all that way and then eating an 80 kilogram human being just doesn't make sense to me. What other reasons would they come to colonize us? Maybe some sort of religion thing. But this one I quite like. This is E.T., 1982, Spielberg film. And let me show you what E.T. was doing in case you forgot. Can you hear the sound on this?
We're hearing you. We're hearing you just fine.
Are you hearing the sound from the screen?
No, I'm not.
Okay. ET here is getting a plant sample. So ET is clearly a botanist. That makes sense. Yes, a civilization would spend billions, trillions of dollars to get a botanist somewhere to collect plant samples. What are you saying? Did you see the film clip? So what are you seeing? You're not seeing any images. Okay, I've advanced quite a bit, so let's try this out. But you see that? Okay, I'd like to show full screen if I could. Let's see how to figure this out, because maybe we can sort of cheat a little bit here by just reducing the size of everything else. How about that?
No, that's great. I've got it full screen. You're all set.
Okay, and then let's come back here to ET. Can you see the film clip?
Yes.
And do you hear the sound with it?
No, unfortunately.
Now, do you hear the sound? Anyway, here's ET. You're hearing sound. Are you hearing music?
No, we're not hearing the music, but that's okay.
Okay. Here's ET. taking a plant. So yes, this is why you'd send somebody into space. Another one I know would come up in the discussion is The Martian, because the protagonist identifies himself as a botanist. This leaves me a big question. Why? I mean, sure, I'd like to go to Mars, but why would you send a botanist to Mars where there's no vegetation apparent anywhere, no indication? That was puzzling to me. But the botany, I mean, I like the film like everybody else. I think Matt Damon's a charming guy, but in terms of botanical content, there really isn't too much there. So let's go into my list here. Number 10 is Sherlock Holmes. And you think, well, that's an odd thing for science fiction, but no, it has a lot of science in it. And in fact, this has some remarkably accurate science. I think I got in trouble originally by criticizing what I personally consider to be the most inane film scientifically ever made, which was Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Make a big deal that they're going to a planet that has only one species on the entire planet. So, of course, as a botanist, I'm thinking, well, must be an autotroph. Is it some sort of alga or cyanobacterium? Or turns out it's a parasite, an obligate parasite, which is the dumbest pretense I've ever seen. So, because I gotten a little bit of negative publicity, I guess, about criticizing that film, I'd like to give credit where credit is due, and this film really knocked my socks off. Here is Sherlock Holmes at the end, and if you can't hear the dialogue, I'll narrate this. He's found. He's found hanging. He's trying to figure out how the villain faked his own death. And so here Watson is slow to cut him down. Finally, he does. And now he's going to try to explain what happened to Blackwood, how he faked his death. Because remember, Watson, funny pulse. And here, I about fell off my chair. Sherlock Holmes announces that it was rhododendron puncticum that was the toxin. And what astonished me is not only is that a correct statement, but then the statement of how it worked. I thought, well, there's probably 3 or 4 of us in the country that know this. There's a toxin called granotoxin in rhododendron species, particularly puncticum, and it reduces your metabolic signs till one could think you were dead. And now they're looking at Gladstone, Watson's dog. He's been obviously experimenting on Gladstone. So the dog's not dead, just looks. So I actually wrote a scientific paper on this film and submitted it to a journal. And the editor, who was a friend, called me and said, "Paul, are you serious?" I said, "Yeah, I think, yeah, I am." And he said, "No, we're not going to publish this." So, but what a terrific film. And I hope we can have some discussion about this in a few minutes. Let me move on here. Medicine Man was an interesting film. I got a call, this is when I was at BYU, from Universal Pictures. They asked me if I actually go down in the jungle looking for the cure for cancer, and I said yes. They said, "Are you willing to testify to that in a court of law?" I said yes. And they said, "Well, what would be your fee?" And I said, "Well, I wouldn't charge anything for telling the truth." And they said, no, you don't know how valuable you are to us. What had happened was that a person had sued the film company and Sean Connery for stealing their script idea about having a character going looking for the cure for cancer. And they said, since I do that for true, it's public domain. So they sent me the script. Oh, and they they asked me about the fee. I said, "I don't need a fee." And they said, "Well, we have to do something." And I said, "Well, I'll bring my youngest daughter down and buy her a ticket into Disneyland or something when I'm at the trial." And They said, "Oh, you don't know how valuable you are to us." I said, "Well, then just make a donation to rainforest conservation." And they said, "Would you tell the jury that's where your fee's going?" I said, "Sure." So they sent me the script, and I called them back up, and I said, "Look, there's a better way maybe than having me testify. You can get a copy of the script they say was plagiarized. I'd be quite happy to compare the stupid biological errors in the current script to those of the putative source script using what's known as cladistic theory. If they have the same dumb biological mistakes like wrong animals, wrong plants, wrong indigenous people in the wrong continent, then you're dead. But if they're different dumb biological errors, then that proves you didn't plagiarize it." Based on that, the people withdrew their suit. And I got a very nice letter from Tom Schulman, who was a screenwriter and had written Dead Poets Society. Mr. Connery sent his kind regards. So I called in the grad students and postdocs. I said, "Now look, when the free world's in trouble, who saves it? James Bond. But when that guy's in trouble, who saves him? A botanist." There's another one that I found quite interesting. I don't know if it got a lot of play in the United States, but it got a tremendous amount of play in Europe, called Limitless, based on a novel, The Dark Fields by Alan Glynn. When I first found out about the film, I was actually in London, and there were these on the tube. There were these ads about this clear pill. I thought, "What's that?" Because I've been working on cognitive improvement for Alzheimer's patients, and then with a bit of research, of course, quickly discovered it was a clever ad campaign. But here's a clip of Bradley Cooper taking. He begins to be a day trader. Starts off with $12,000. Takes his drug day, sort of in 11 days, $12 million initial $12,000 investment, using the attention of big players. I thought it was quite a clever film. In Act One, he of course discovers the drug. Act Two, he becomes very wealthy and very attractive. And then in Act Three, we see the downside of the drug. And I thought it was quite an accurate film. And I think that Alan Glynn must have had either pharmaceutical experience or some friend in the pharmaceutical industry to help him. Number 8, so that's 8, Limitless with Bradley Cooper. Let me talk about number 7. You lost my audio. Okay. No, let me see, just a moment. Okay. Let's see here. Right, I understand. I can hear you. Let me try see. Can you hear that? No. Can you hear me now? So let me see if I can share that screen again somehow. Okay. I put this in for. Okay, well, let's stop that then. What do you suggest we do here? It seemed to be working okay. Let's try share your screen again. Can you hear me still? Ryan? You can hear me? Okay. You can't hear me again. Oh dear. Can you hear me now? Okay. Can you hear me yet? But can you hear me? You hear me, Ryan?
Sorry, folks. We'll be right back. Try and let's see. You're not muted. Yeah. So talk again.
So do you hear me now? or something in between. Several times and learn how they speak without any previous written orthography. Christopher Nolan, of course, has written some terrific films, and with his brother. Interstellar really knocked my socks off. First of all, Hans Zimmer did this magisterial score, which I just love. It's a very long film. I think they could have cut most of the first act out, Matthew McConaughey. But when I saw the two things, first of all, the representation of the black hole, not as a circular two-dimensional hole, but as a sphere that projects, sort of invokes the light of the galaxy beyond it. I was very impressed, and I thought, I wonder who did this. And it turned out Kip Thorne, who is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist and was actually born in Provo, Utah, did some really advanced computation for what a black hole would look like. The other thing I thought was very wonderful was the presentation of multiple dimensions, with time as a different dimension, and sort of a four-dimensional tesseract that he finds himself in. And I don't know about you, but I thought it was a terrific film and very scientifically accurate. Also, we don't hear explosions in space and that sort of thing, so that made me pretty happy. One film that hasn't been given enough credit, my opinion, which is my number 3, and now I'm really up into what I'm considering the best science fiction films ever made, is La Jetée, a French film by Chris Marker. It's composed of still photographs about a little boy going to Orly Airport and seeing a man shot. Later, after the apocalypse, he's sent back in time, falls in love with a woman, does what his masters tell him to do, finally asks to go back where he can be with this love of his life, and they send an assassin squad out to get him. That's the theme, that's the plot of The Terminator by James Cameron. It's the plot of Deja Vu with Denzel Washington. It's the plot in many ways of Back to the Future. There's so many films involving time travel that can trace themselves back to this short, I think it's about a 25-minute film, but and there's a little surprise I won't tell you about in it, but it's stunning to me. And basically, like Interstellar, I think the conceit of the film is that it argues that love can transcend time and space. La Jetée was later remade as a film called 12 Monkeys. I think it was Michael Gillen was the director. Brad Pitt had a wonderful role in it, and but La Jetée really deserves a watch if you're interested in science fiction. And to me, that's the third best science fiction film ever made. And of course, I've skipped a few here, like Metropolis by Fritz Lang. Number 2 might surprise you, but the more I watch this film, the more impressed I am with this because it is so ethnobotanical. It's called Arrival. It was in 2016. Denis Villeneuve, who just did the 2-part Dune series, which I thought was terrific, but I still like the earlier David Lynch version, is remarkable because she's trying to acquire language and figure out, she's assigned to try to figure out how these aliens, I'm very impressed the aliens do not turn out to be people and bipedal primates in rubber suits. They're heptapods. And the techniques she uses to figure out the language are precisely what I do when I'm in the jungle with a new group of people. That if I can get one sentence, which is the boy goes to his house, I can use that as scaffolding to build other much more sophisticated language on. And she does the same thing. And I think it's just a terrific film based on Ted Chiang's story, Story of Your Life. And then, of course, you can probably all guess what I consider to be the greatest science fiction film of all time. And I think I'm not in odd company with this, which is 2001. Oh, here's Arrival. Here she is trying to learn how to communicate. Amy Adams here is the protagonist communicating with the aliens, who actually don't use sound. They use a unique way of pictographs. And then number one is, of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I have to say that this film still works for me. What I mean by that is when I watch the film, I'm immersed in it. I sort of forget I'm watching a film. And some of the mundane details I really love, like when they're eating their lunch and it's obviously made from artificial culture food, and they're claiming, well, yeah, this tastes a bit like chicken and that sort of thing. But I think it's a tremendous, tremendous achievement that's not been excelled yet. Now, obviously, I've left a lot of people's favorites out, and I'm quite happy to take criticism for that. But these are 10 films that I wanted to talk about today that I think are quite good. Let me see. Am I back on screen now? And that'll end the presentation. I'm happy to take questions and go forward. Or criticisms, please.
No, that's great. We do have a couple questions. Go ahead and stop your screen share, and I'll just make you big here.
Okay, let me see here how I stop that. I think I go here. Did that stop it?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, what do I hit here? Sorry,
That's all right. It's the big, there's 5 big buttons at the bottom of your chat screen.
Yes.
Just hit that middle one.
On here.
Yep.
Streaming. Okay, thank you. Thank you for helping me.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, let me get back to the questions. One person wanted to know, what is it that, as a normal person watching a movie, if you see, what can we notice as a normal person watching to know that a movie is getting it wrong as far as the botany or the science behind it?
Yeah, you know, let me answer that by going back to Ridley Scott. I didn't talk about Blade Runner here, but I have to say that, and it turns out the lead actor in that is actually a resident here where I live, and very nice guy. But Ridley Scott has such a dense visual production design. And it turns out even the magazines on the racks had articles in them. That's always nice for actors. I'm astonished how actors act against a green screen nowadays. But I think that you can sort of get a sense that things are correct, even if you're not an expert in a field, just by this sort of overwhelming idea of density of information. The other thing I'd say is that, and again, I'm happy to engage in criticism on this, but I'm not one for on-screen explication. I like to just hit the film and not have, but I find it sort of patronizing. Forgive me, but in Matrix, I think it was Samuel Jackson, came out he was sitting in a chair against a white background and spent 3 minutes explaining what the film meant to the audience, because I guess he thought we were all so stupid we couldn't understand it. Contrast that with a film called Push, where there's no explication at all. And I love films like that. So if you have somebody say, yes, this is a microscope and it magnifies things, that's a good indication they've got the science wrong. But thanks for the question.
That's a funny one. Do you get called a lot as an expert in the field? Not a lot, but do you get other call? Have you ever gotten other calls from films to provide expertise?
Yeah, it always amazes me that particularly Hollywood will spend a great deal of money on historical accuracy. I'm trying to think of the film now, Heaven's Gate. I mean, criminy, that actually I think busted Universal Films. And then the botany's wrong. They have the wrong plants. I mean, and I've actually gotten in trouble in theaters when I was in Cambridge. Barbara and I went to see Raiders of the Lost Ark. I was excited about this film, and the opening, and it has a friend that's playing in it, and the opening credits roll, and I'm looking at the plants, and then the subtitle says Peru, 1938. And I'm sitting in the theater. I said, "It's not Peru," and some guy behind me said, "Quiet down." I said, "No, it's not Peru." I said, "That's obviously Cordyline terminalis. And we've got a Prochardia species over there, and this is Hawaii." And then more people saying, "Shut up!" And I'm saying, "No, in fact, I think it's the island of Kauai." And Barbara said, "Paul, if you keep speaking, I'll not attend the cinema with you anymore." So I shut up. But the film was sort of ruined for me. I mean, I enjoyed it like everything else. But one interesting thing you might like to know: I was hiking with him, and he said, "Paul, did you see that deal on Nature the other night about the rainforest?" And I said, "Harrison, I don't know how to tell you this, but that's what I do for a living. So the last thing I want to do is watch something like that. I want to watch monkeys driving spaceships and shooting at things." And he said, "I'm the same way." He told me he doesn't watch any Hollywood films. Turned out he'd never watched any of his own films.
Oh, wow.
Until his son last year egged him into it and made him watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. He's just a guy that learns his lines, hits the mark. Everybody likes him. A very humble guy, but he's a workman. And when he's done, boom, he's back and he's doing fine woodworking and things he's interested in. So I thought that was sort of interesting. Next comment.
What do you think about the Jurassic Park films? And I'm just going to expand this about other Michael Crichton films too. What do you think about him as well, I guess he's a writer, not the filmmaker, but what do you think about Jurassic Park and then any other Michael Crichton that you like?
Well, okay, let me talk about Jurassic Park. First of all, I enjoyed the film. And I knew George Pointer. I was working at Cal Berkeley, who was the expert on amber. And, we'd actually sat in some small seminars, and he showed us these bugs in there. And, so the science I was okay with until we get to the botany. Who is it? Helen Hunt, that's she's the paleobotanist. Right. And she comes up to a Stegosaurus. And she says, "And this plant hasn't been seen since the Jurassic." And they show a begonia, and I thought, oh my heavens. I mean, that's evolved long since the dinosaurs. Plus, they shot it in our botanical gardens in Hawaii, where I was director. Not while I was there, but later. And there's so many other plants, a cycad tree, anything they could have chosen. So I think it's a good idea maybe for the film people to get a little bit of botanical advice. But I have to say that Sherlock Holmes film knocked my socks off because I'd never seen an actor utter the correct diagnosis of a plant species before on film.
You're doing work with ALS and Alzheimer's medicine right now. What kind of, if you were to look at a science fiction future of that, what do you think is going to come out of that?
I'd encourage people watching, if you're interested in that topic, to go on to Google and Google my name and Alzheimer's, or go on to www.brainchemistrylabs.org and click, because Sanjay Gupta from CNN came out and just came up with a 7-minute documentary on our work. We're pretty excited. Both he and I believe that the last person to get Alzheimer's disease is alive right now. we hear about patient zero epidemiologically. This is patient inpatient, because the advances are so fast and so rapid, including some things we're doing based on our ethnobotanical studies in remote islands, that we think this disease will be gone within 10 or 15 years. And it'll be like polio. As a kid, everybody was scared of getting it. Our parents wouldn't even let us go to swimming pools. And then Jonas Salk came out and it just disappeared. And both Sanjay Gupta and I believe that the last patient is alive, that within 10 to 20 years, it'll no longer be an issue.
That's amazing. That's very amazing. And we'd love to see that. That's all the questions that we have in here. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Or anything else that has...
Yeah, again, I think that patronizing the audience is a bad reflection on Hollywood and on filmmakers. I like films that are visually dense. I look at production design. I'm very interested in scientific accuracy. And I think getting a bit of scientific advice. You asked earlier about Michael Crichton. I could go through a couple of his other films. One that's quite interesting, I think it was his first film, was Andromeda Strain, about a satellite which grabs some bacteria from the or virus, or virus-like molecule from near space, and kills off a small town in Nevada. And then we see the scientific efforts to isolate that and figure out what it was. I thought that was quite a good film. Let's see, where's some other Crichton films? Westworld, which is okay. Jurassic Park.
Did he write Sphere? Is that a Crichton film, or is that something else?
No, I read the book. He was good. He had an MD from Harvard Medical School. He was a smart guy, but it's sort of in a prelude to Chat GPT. In his back of his books, he cites these articles, scientific articles, and they're fake. They're not real articles. If you try to look them up, they're not there. So
are you serious? That he cites article.
yeah, he has extra information in the back of his book, and then there's these articles, and a lot of them are fake. I mean, the best one is Andromeda Strain. Just made up fake articles, and when you do Chat GPT for your term paper, guarantee it's going to come up with fake articles.
That's amazing. That prompted a new question. What's your advice for making the science fiction clear to the reader without painfully condescending explanations?
Yeah, I think just assume that the audience is smart. And let me just go back to The Martian. I think that was pretty good. They didn't have too much explication there, and I think the authors thought people were smart. And you'd be amazed how many people have had a math class. That's always bugs me in films that include mathematics. They never talk about the math. They just show some guy scribbling on the board, and he's some sort of genius guy. The second thing that I really would like to see, and that's one of the reasons I put Arrival as my number 2 film, is I really like films that show scientists as they really are. And here we have the major protagonist, who's a linguist, Amy Adams, played by a woman. It turns out that, dear Lord, when he gave out scientific ability, did not restrict it to one race or to one gender or one orientation. It's very rare that there's a single scientist that works alone and comes up with something. We work in teams, sometimes small teams, but they're diverse teams. And I really like the idea of portraying a diverse group of scientists. One that did quite well on this was Contact. Who'd that have? Jodie, help me with this. Who remembers who?
That was Jodie Foster, right?
Jodie Foster, right? And then who was the Carl Sagan? I think it came from a Carl Sagan.
He was the writer, yeah.
Yeah, and that thing was great. I mean, wow, the
Matthew
science.
McConaughey, Jodie
Matthew
Foster.
McConaughey.
Yeah.
And I thought it was quite clever because the film starts off with a conflict between religion and science, which is sort of a trope that's out there. But then at the end, she's unable to prove her voyage to another galaxy, and just tells people they're going to have to accept it on faith. And I love that a lot. I mean, faith is. I go through the scriptures. I substitute the word trust for faith. Science, we have to trust each other's results. It's a terrible, terrible betrayal when somebody fakes their data. And this was quite clever that at the end, Jodie Foster's character it reverts more to a religious argument, faith-based argument on her science.
I had forgotten that. That's right. One more
I'd love
question.
to hear some. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if you have some
just
prompts.
anybody that has some films that they think that I should have mentioned and didn't. I'm very open to that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if anybody has any films that you think should be on this list, let us know. What do you think about what challenges are most urgent with global urbanization? Are you pushing out a lot of plant life? What's happening there?
Well, this takes me into. You're going to help me with this. James Cameron's new film, Avatar. I enjoyed it like everybody else did, but portrayal of indigenous peoples was condescending and insulting. I mean, as we get urbanized, we're losing indigenous cultures. And these people are smart. They're not dummies. They're not savages. They don't dance by just putting their hands in the air. They have these amazing stories and legends. And I find that they're very good in terms of empiricism, that they know in my world what works for medicinal plants, what doesn't. I'd like to see more authentic portrayals of indigenous people. One film that's not a science fiction film, but I think one of the first ones to do that was Dances with Wolves, where we actually learned that Native Americans don't just say how and speak by monosyllabic grunts, but he actually had people speaking Lakota and subtitling it. And forgive me if this bugs you, but the truth is that indigenous people are smart, scientists are diverse, and the portrayal we get in it's too many films shows people that have my skin color and wearing a lab coat and big glasses as the scientist. And I'd like to see that change because we need every person we can find that has scientific talent. And that particularly includes people from underrepresented groups, particularly women and minorities. You could argue that's why the Nazis lost the war.
Yeah.
They drove out all their good scientists because so many of them were Jewish. And the way these guys got out of Germany is they go up to Stockholm to get their Nobel Prize and they just keep on coming to America, So, Hans Bethe, Enrico Fermi, of course, Einstein, many others. Leo Salazar built the weapons that led America to have military supremacy.
This one's not necessarily a science fiction movie, but it is about. Did you see? This is Harrison Ford again. Did you see The Mosquito Coast, 1986?
I have not seen that, but if he's living with indigenous people, I'll go watch it.
This is the subtitle. It's a jungle movie. It's called The Mosquito Coast, and Harrison Ford is an inventor who spurns his city life and moves his family to the jungles of Central America.
I wonder if that's a Paul Theroux novel based on. I'll look it up. Thank you for the. I'll go look.
Yeah, that is a Paul Theroux. It is Paul Theroux, exactly.
Yeah, sounds sort of like something he'd write, So yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was 1986, The Mosquito Coast with Harrison Ford.
Yeah, that was one of my issues. Frankly, I wrote a memoir of our life in Samoa as a small family and the discovery of a new anti-HIV/AIDS drug, Prostratin, and we all nearly got killed down there. The whole family. We had to swim for it, when the tidal wave hit us and hurricane-driven waves. And so I took it I got an agent in New York. He took it to the big publishing houses, and they said, well, they like this, Paul. He said, but you've got too much about indigenous people here and too much about spirituality. And I said, well, tough, And they said, well, don't you want to have a bestseller? I said, no, I don't. I want to portray indigenous people correctly. So I was working with my scientific publisher, which was W.H. Freeman Scientific American, and a science book. And Jonathan Cobb, the senior editor, saw me. I was in New York, and he said, Paul, you look discouraged. I said, well, I'm just sort of annoyed at these publishers, and I fired my agent. And he said, "Well, let me look at your manuscript." He looked at it the next day. He says, "We're going to publish this." I said, "You're a scientific publisher." He says, "No, we love this." He said, "But we want you to emphasize the indigenous culture and its significance and the spirituality." So I published that. It was called Nafanua, Nafanua, saving the Samoan rainforest. And once I left Berlin or BYU, I got drafted by the King of Sweden. I understood they were showing it, having freshmen read this. I think is an example of bad writing for freshman
Oh
composition.
no.
But anyway, that was fun, in which I try portray the reality of indigenous people. I mean, they're not the noble savages. They're people just like me and you with strengths and weaknesses, but they're very, very smart.
We got about 4 minutes left, and there's one more question here. What is it that you liked so much about the David Lynch version of Dune?
You know, this came out on the heels of Star Wars, and I imagine when Star Wars hit, and I love Star Wars like everybody else. It was the first film I'd ever attended since the bridge on the River Kwai when I was a little boy, where the audience stood up afterwards and applauded the screen. So, but then there was this urgent demand by Hollywood for science fiction scripts, and David Lynch's film came out of that. So did Alien, and I haven't mentioned that. I thought that was a very fine film. And who was it that to direct that? It was Ridley Scott, I think, did Alien. Cameron did the sequel. Um, but I love the production design. I mean, first of all, because I've been fortunate enough to work for and hang out with, several different monarchs. King of Sweden, Prince Alfred in Monaco likes me, and his, the Emperor of Japan, all that sort of thing. It's hard for me in the casting of the new one to regard aristocrats as having English accents. And Dino De Laurentiis, had all these. He was the producer. I think he influenced the casting. There's a lot of people, Italians. The guy there was fabulous. It looked great. People hated the film, the critics, because they couldn't understand it. Perhaps if you hadn't read the book, it wouldn't be sensible. I thought the casting was awesome. I loved the soundtrack by Toto. I thought the whole thing was just terrific. So, but again, I readily admit I'm probably the only person in North America that liked that version.
Well, I liked it too, actually. So that's just great. Thank
And
you
I
very
actually
much.
prefer it.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
We
thanks for
appreciate
with
you
me,
being here
everybody.
and your unique insight into some of these things. A lot of people enjoyed that. So
Okay, well, thanks everybody, and thanks for having me on, and great to be part of the team here. Thank you, Ron.
thank you very much. And we'll
Bye
see you
now.
guys in about 10 more minutes for Nadia Pupa, the editor, who'll be talking about book evaluations. See you again soon. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We are on our last presentation for the afternoon, and we have a great one for you. We're going to be doing manuscript and book evaluations by Nadia Pupa, who is the CEO of Peak Publishing Incorporated. Nadia is a skilled project manager, editor, writer, and designer in all areas of the publishing process. She served as the president for San Diego Professional Editors Network from 2021 to 2022. And prior to that, she served on the board as a director. After her term as president ended, she was inspired to launch the Editor's Half Hour podcast, a monthly podcast that focuses on the craft of editing, industry trends, and the editorial resources for advanced editors. In July of 23, she was named a winner of the 40 Next Top Business Leaders Under 40. And in November of 23, she was the winner of Business Women of the Year by the San Diego Business Journal in recognition for her efforts in launching the podcast and for creating the first ever affirmation cards for editors. She currently serves on the Women of the Club Committee of the University Club atop Symphony Towers, which is a unique women-led initiative meant to empower and inspire women by creating community within the club and in the San Diego area by hosting and supporting a variety of charity-related events. We're super happy to have Nadia with us today, and I know that a lot of you are excited to hear everything that she has to say about the editing process. If you have questions, we ask you to click on the link to our Discord in the description of this video. So expand that and click on the Discord link. Join us there in the Dragon chat, and you can ask questions at the end of this presentation. We'll have some time left for that. With that said, we're excited to see you in the chat room, and Nadia, we'll give it to you now. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was very nice. And I have some of the things listed on my bio slides. I could skip over those, which is awesome. So thank you so much for that introduction. And welcome to manuscript evaluations. We could call it book evaluations. I use those terms interchangeably. I'm very honored to be here. So thank you for inviting me to present on this topic. So a little bit about me. Ryan, you gave a great introduction, everything you listed. I can just give a little bit of more background too into why and how I got into book evaluations. I have been editing, writing, I've been designing books, publications, so many different things since 2004. In fact, it wasn't until I was recording a podcast episode with one of my guests when I had a revelation that I have never had a job other than being an editor. And I had to say it twice because I didn't realize, wow, I've never worked as anything other than being an editor or book designer. And so I know a lot about a lot of different things and different industries, fiction and nonfiction. As Ryan mentioned, I'm a past president of the San Diego Professional Editors Network. And some background there is after my term ended as president, it really inspired me to launch the podcast, which is the Editor's Half Hour. And that podcast is very much focused on the editing industry. We do get a little into, publishing industry as a whole, but it is very focused on the editing process. I've won a few awards, and I'm currently actually nominated for a Rising Star Award in the category of art and design by the San Diego Magazine. And voting, I guess we have to vote, which is so weird, but voting ends on Sunday. So I'm trying to get some votes. So if you're interested, look me up and vote for me. I would appreciate it. So I'd like to share a little story about how I got into manuscript evaluations. This is not a new concept, but it is something that's been around for a while. I put my spin on it, and that's what I'm going to get into today during this presentation. It was not, though, until 2021. That was the year that I felt like I unlocked this magic. I discovered the magic of and the power of what manuscript evaluations can do for writers and for editors. So I have presented on this topic specifically to editors to give them information and encourage them to add this as a service line to their business. Obviously, today we're talking about how it benefits the writer. So the story started in 2021. I had a consultation with a client, and the client just seemed a little insecure about his writing. He is a journalist, and he is a writer, an established writer. And he just felt insecure because it was his first time writing a book. That's different than writing an article. It's different than writing a blog. he felt a little overwhelmed by the process, but he had a completed manuscript. So he finished the book. And so in the consultation, I was, as an editor, leading him down that path of copy editing. But he, his questions were not about grammar and punctuation. His reservations for starting that process were focused on the fact that he didn't feel confident in the content itself. He felt that the writing needed to be improved. Did his ideas connect? Was it organized? This was where the conversation kept going. And, when I'm working with a client, I don't want to push them in one direction over another. I want to listen to what their concerns are. And so then I said, well, why don't we just not edit it and I just read it and give you an evaluation? And he said, great. And so that's where it began. I actually, not only did I evaluate his book, I had a process, a very specific process that I had created. And it was so helpful. It changed not the trajectory of the book, or it didn't change his goal, his audience, his intended audience. But what it changed was it added so much more depth after I evaluated it in areas that he didn't even consider. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. It's going to be very detailed and focused. So what is it? What is a manuscript or a book evaluation? I have a team at Peak Publishing, and we define it as an in-depth analysis and critique of the story, structure, and style of a completed or near complete manuscript. I put that in there, and that's how we define it, because we have worked with clients who have written 40,000 words, and it has doubled and grown to 80,000 words to a completed novel. And so that's where they get stuck in their writing process, and it helped getting that evaluation. So it doesn't have to be fully completed. Typically, when we do meet with writers, we do not push or perform any developmental or copy editing. We're not moving the book around. We're not changing things. We're not even touching it. And we don't like to touch their manuscript until it's been evaluated, until the author, or if the author has been through a series of book coaching sessions. That's another service I provide, which is book coaching, which is a different setup. But the point is that we do not want to just take a manuscript and tear it apart and do our thing unless the writer is okay with it. So that I'll get into that in a few more minutes. But these manuscript evaluations are so helpful for not just fiction, but also nonfiction. And that could be memoir and something informational. There's a lot of power behind that. So I just thought I would note it. But that's my little sticky note there. But today we are really focused on fiction writers. So before I get in, I kind of explained what an evaluation is. I think it makes sense for me to just take a minute and make it very clear what an evaluation is not. It is not editing. I already said that, but I really, really want to emphasize the fact that grammar and punctuation, that's not part of the conversation when it comes to manuscript evaluations. Developmental editing, that is full-blown moving, restructuring sentences. Again, not going to happen in a manuscript evaluation. And I briefly mentioned book coaching. No, it is not a back and forth conversation, and it should not be. An evaluation is a one-time thing, and it is a thorough process, but it is not that back and forth coaching. I will say, though, that sometimes it does segue into coaching if it's needed for the writer. It's all based on what the writer needs. So a good evaluation, and I'll get into that soon, should be focused on content. It is not a grammar lesson. It is not a lesson on grammar and punctuation. And some editors get confused, and that's their strong suit, and that's in their wheelhouse. And they sometimes work with writers and start giving them a grammar lesson. And writers, yeah, of course you need to, have good grammar and punctuation when you're writing, or at least be mindful of those things. But when you're writing, it's a creative process. And so if you want to be, taught the grammar rules, then, you could take a class on that. That's not what a manuscript evaluation is. One more thing I want to focus on is that it is not a critique. And, we can use that term loosely, critiquing something. There's writers groups that do critiques, but I'm pretty sure a critique is focused on pinpointing problem areas And it's usually a hard stop right there. Like, here are some problem areas. Done. And then the writer's like, okay, good to know. And then the writer then figures out on their own how to fix those problem areas. This is not a critique. It's deeper than a critique. We take it to that next level. You're not only showing, we're not going to only pinpoint what those weaknesses are. We're also going to provide suggestions that you may or may not agree with. But the fact that you're given those suggestions as a writer, it helps guide your path. And so an analogy that I can think of that I think is effective is if you think about healthcare. You get an evaluation, then you get a diagnosis, and then it leads to advice. It's similar with a manuscript evaluation. You're getting not a diagnosis, but you're finding out what those weak areas are. And then you're given some pathways on how to maybe fix or, enhance those areas that might need it. And so the best way I can kind of, explain in a nutshell what the goal of the evaluation is. And in the industry, it's known as an alpha read, which is very different from a beta read. Um, an alpha read, a beta read, these do not have to be done by an editor. However, I am an editor, so I'm very biased. I do believe that an editor would be probably the best person to do an alpha read. Um, but again, you don't have to be a professional editor to do this. And I guess the point of me saying that is, I know you've heard of beta readers. Beta readers are very, very important, but the beta readers are that last chance, really, before the book continues on in the publishing process. And so if you are interested, though, I will plug that I do talk about beta reading and the business side of beta reading on the podcast, one of my earlier episodes. So anyway, an alpha read is basically the industry term for what a manuscript evaluation is. Again, it's the story, the structure, the style. But let's talk about structure. What does that mean? We will focus on the overall logic and flow of information or storytelling, the sequence of events in your story, and then we will take that step back and really think about, okay, are there certain parts that might be a little overly complicated or maybe a little chaotic or unorganized? Those are going to be pinpointed in that manuscript evaluation. The story itself, the plot, what's going on? What's going on with these characters? Are they fully developed? Does the reader connect? Is that dialogue strong? Are there plot holes that you didn't think about? Are there elements that didn't connect? Logical things too. But the most important thing when it comes to your story is, does it keep the reader interested? Do they want to know? Are they emotionally invested in these characters to the point where they want to keep reading? Those are things that we will tell the author or the writer. And the last and most important is style. We focus on the general pacing, the rhythm, descriptive language. These things actually help identify the author's, or I should say the writer's personality. At Peak Publishing, our tagline is publish with personality, and that is so important to us. We really, really look into what differentiates writers, what makes them stand out among their group. And so, yes, you want your writing to align with the general style of sci-fi, fantasy, but we don't want to put the writer in a box so that it's just like every other writer out there. We're really gonna, find that writer's personality in the manuscript evaluation process. As we're reading through, we're like, oh, this is so cool, or this is so unique, and this is so specific to this specific writer. Those are really cool identifiers that kind of come out throughout the process. So what should you expect as a writer? How would you benefit from this? And I can at least speak to how I do and conduct these manuscript evaluations. I, like I mentioned at the very beginning, I set it up in a very specific process. And it starts with the first thing that you're provided after we've read through the whole thing. You receive a report. In that report, which I'll show you on the next slide, what it actually looks like, it pinpoints those strengths, the weaknesses. And then, like I said before, we offer suggestions. We take it to that next level and say, hey, maybe you could try this take, or maybe you could, use these words, or share more about the setting, or the way the building looked in this when you're describing the scene. We'll get in there. We'll get in the weeds. And again, they are suggestions, but they are not meant to be they're not the end all be all. As a writer, you're in control. It's your book. You're the author. But I think it really helps to get that insight when you might feel a little stuck in certain areas. And it helps to consider things that you hadn't even thought of. So that's what you get. You get a detailed report. The report can range from 10 pages to 16. Sometimes they go as big as 20 pages, depending on how much we have to say about the work. So you'll receive that report. You would also receive a Word doc, your manuscript handed back to you, but it's annotated and littered with comments. I will show you some samples of those later in the next couple slides, but what's so exciting about this is that you will see the emotional response unfold in real time. So you're going to see when the editor's reading it and there's that plot twist and it's like, oh my God, and you freak out like this. I didn't expect this. And you see that. If you're funny, if there's something funny, you'll see the comments. They may be as simple as LOL, this is hilarious, but you're getting that confirmation that your joke was a joke and it was funny. So you'll see it's really fun to see, just to read through the comments, and they are referenced in the summary in the report. So, you get the in the weeds on the Word doc, which is annotated, and it's those specific points, but then, they reference back to the report. And then once you receive these two things, I always host a debrief, and I give the writer time. The writer may need 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe just a couple days to debrief on everything that they looked at. In that debrief, that's the writer's chance to really talk to the person who did the report, who evaluated your novel. And usually it ranges from an hour to an hour and a half. It should be led by you. You're the client. You should have come to that meeting with a list of questions. And that full hour, I've done so many of these meetings, that full hour is really just getting into the weeds with your content, with your story. And it's a fun conversation, and it's an exciting, it should be uplifting and really encouraging. And then it naturally segues into 30 minutes of next steps. What's next? Do you need a graphic designer? Do you need a book? Do you need somebody to format the book? Do you know how to publish the book? Do you know how to get maybe on Ingram Spark, ISBNs, copyright, all of that stuff? What are those next steps? I help guide the editor or the writer on the publishing process. So that debrief is really, really great. Typically, for something, if you're thinking, okay, what do I need a budget for this? It's typically flat fee. The prices will range from editor to editor, ranges based on experience. I usually charge a flat fee, and I base that fee on a range of 50 to 80,000 words, but that fee gets adjusted. Sometimes there are books I have had to adjust because the book was over 100,000 words. And that's not uncommon. It's becoming very common for books to be very lengthy. But then you have to expect that your, fee would be higher for everything beyond that, for designing, editing, when it gets to those next stages. Something to think about. One more thing I forgot to mention, actually, I'll go back to the last slide. One more thing I forgot to mention about the report is, and you kind of saw it just a second ago, but there is a last page, which is the most effective page of that report, which is the overall evaluation. That is where we really look at the book. We take that big step back and we look at everything from what were the highlights, what were the favorite characters, what were the best parts, what were those really good strengths. Overall, what were the overall weaknesses that really needed that major, that might need some help. And then we list out the overall suggestions as almost like bullet points on, you could do these things, to think these are some things to consider. And so, yes, there is a breakdown per chapter, but the last page does have a full overall. And so it's very simple. It's a condensed and summarized strengths, weaknesses, and suggestions. And we do, like I said, divide it by chapter. And this is not meant for you to read. You can if you want, but it's very small. It's just a sample page to give you an insight look into what an actual evaluation looks like. Yes, I did get permission from the author to share this. I do want to draw your eyes' attention to the very, very bottom of the page where there is a disclaimer here. And it's my way as the owner of a company, as an editor, to just say, hey, listen, this whole process is subjective in nature. These are my opinions. These are Nadia, my opinions as an editor. It's solely based on me and what I think, you could use to benefit, but they will not be the same as another editor. Do I think that you as a writer should get your book evaluated multiple times? Absolutely not. No, you do not need to do that. That would be ridiculous. But I do think you need to be very mindful, very take your time, interview more than one editor, figure out how they do a manuscript evaluation, and make sure that they're a right fit for you. But you do not need to go to multiple people. The point of this disclaimer is saying that I am not representing a literary agency, a publishing company, or anything of that sort. It's just the fact that I'm using my expertise, my knowledge of publishing, my editorial skills into the evaluation process. So that's very important. So when you do meet an editor who wants to conduct one, you have to be very, very specific on what your concerns are. And so that's what happened with Lisa Shapiro. This is a snippet, this is a sample from Lisa's evaluation on her book titled The Golden Quartz. And I was on a panel presentation talking about the developmental editing process. And I talked about my holistic perspective, and a lot of the things I said connected with her. And so she reached out and said, I'd really like to get my manuscript evaluated. Keep in mind, she is an established author. She has a few things that she self-published, but she's also had book deals. But before she wanted to move along in the query process and the book proposal process, what that I know some of the writers here have been through that. It's a pretty intense process. She wanted to really get her manuscript nailed down. So I went back to my notes for this presentation specifically, and I saw some great things. She had questions, she had concerns, and good for her for coming to the editor prepared and listed what those were. And so she said, before you do this, I really want to know if my main character really remains true to her goals. Was she successful in that full circle storytelling? She wanted to make sure that her readers understood the main character's internal struggle, because there was some transformation that happened. It was a coming of age story. It was not a book for young adults, but it was a book with a young adult character. And so she is not a young adult. Lisa Shapiro wanted to make sure that if she's writing a book with teenagers, was her dialogue believable for teenagers in the year 2024? And so we're like, that is great to know. So now I'm going to be very specific when I look through and read the book. Our comments are going to be focused on whether or not we thought the dialogue was good, or if there was areas where she could make it a little bit more modern. So keeping all of that in mind, it's really good to know what is good advice. How should the author, or how should the editor talk to you, the writer? How should writers, what would, not only what you should expect, but how would you want to be talked to, really? And the editor should be gentle. The editor should never tear down your work. They should always be gentle in their approach, especially when they're talking about the weaknesses. And whatever they say to you as a writer, you should feel encouraged and confident in your writing when you hear their feedback. It should not make you feel the opposite, which is discouraged and overwhelmed. That's the opposite of how you should feel when you're working with an editor. The editor should be thoughtful. The editor should provide should engage with your story, invest their time and emotional energy into the story. The editor should show you their enthusiasm and support your writing efforts. That's their job. And if they're not doing that, then you probably need to find a better editor who's going to support your writing journey and send you down a meaningful path, not a path that's going to make you feel like, oh, I have to rewrite this whole thing. In fact, you should feel empowered and you should feel inspired to do those things if you have to, quote unquote, rewrite or readjust some things in your stories. And most importantly, the editor should be honest. The editor should ask you a lot of questions. The editor should be, giving you that feedback, giving you some suggestions. And it's okay if there's a difference of opinions. But if there is, the editor should back up their opinions. Like, why is the editor giving you these suggestions? They should be able to back that up and have that nice conversation with you in that debrief. One thing that I'll just briefly mention, I don't want to derail my presentation. I have a feeling there might be some questions about AI. Yes, there are AI programs and softwares out there that can, quote unquote, evaluate manuscripts. But I'm just going to say that they are great. And I'm not knocking AI. AI can be useful, used as a tool, but it is not, it's good at, I'll say this, AI is good at giving you metrics, identifying percentages of your story, use of words. It's not going to lead the writers down a path. It could, okay, if writers focus on metrics and percentages of things in their story and they're just analyzing it at that level, it can create paranoia in the writing process. And so, yes, you can use AI to evaluate your manuscript, great, but is AI going to laugh at your jokes? Is AI going to get excited and say, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing," or "This plot hole is so," or they may identify plot holes, I don't know, but if there's a plot twist, you want to know if it got the writer or the reader excited, like, "Oh my gosh, I was not expecting this." You want to shock the reader, and the editor will give you that feedback. And so again, that's just I don't want to derail it. I don't want to get into AI, but just letting you know that in the manuscript evaluation process, it should be focused on that emotional investment of those characters. And you should see the LOLs or whatever it is. If you're telling a joke, you should be able to see those and get that confirmation from the editor. So before we get into samples of good feedback, let's do bad. Let's get some juicy ones here. But here's my disclaimer. None of these comments were ever used. I would never talk to a writer like this. First one, good storytelling. Great. How does that help you as a writer? What does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. Come on, that's not good. Here's another one. It would be best to use an M dash here for an interruption in dialogue. Don't get me started on M dashes. Don't get me started on punctuation. I'm a total grammar nerd. But that's not the point of the manuscript evaluation. It's not the point. I am not going to give you a grammar lesson. Oh, look, there's a drop period here. Great. You're not going to see comment. This is a horrible comment. How is that helping you as a writer? That's what the copy editor is here for. That's what you lean on the copy editor for, to find these things and get them done and fixed. Here's another sample. This was written in perfect present tense, but it should be written in the present perfect progressive tense for clarity. Again, grammar lesson, you're seeing a pattern here. These are all bad examples of bad feedback. Here's two more. This dialogue is effective and it summarizes the events of the day. Great. I'm giving you, how is that giving the writer any sense of engagement with the content? I'm just basically spitting back out to you the plot or the it summarizes the events of the day. Okay, that's not useful. And here's the last one. This description is too extraneous and also a tad pretentious. You need to unpack this dialogue and your thought process behind why you thought this scene was necessary. Okay, that is so condescending. An editor should never talk to you this way. If an editor talks to you this way, let me know and I'll give you my 2 cents. That is very condescending it's as if the editor knows better. No, that's unnecessary. It's not, it's the opposite of being gentle. If there's extraneous information, there's a better way to say that to the writer. So if an editor is talking to you like this, I don't like that. That's not okay. Okay. Examples of good feedback, some juicy ones. Okay, yes, this is simple. It just says great line. But let me give you some more context here. This comment was focused on a comeback. There was an argument, like a friendly, playful argument happening between two characters. And the comeback was just so good. It was like, yes. And so the person, it wasn't me who did this evaluation, someone on my team, his name is Jarrett Brazel. You could look him up on the website. He's really great at doing these, but he said, great line. Like he's like almost like giving the writer a high five, a virtual high five, because it was just such a good comeback. And I know that it made the writer feel good to see that. Something awkward happened in the story and it was so pathetic, but it was so relatable. And again, this isn't a full paragraph, feedback in the Word doc. It was just enough for the writer to just get to nod her head and say, okay, good. It was the patheticness and awkwardness was actually relatable. That's what she wanted. Here's another sample. This gives further clarity on the geography of the setting, and it was very nice. So this is a compliment, but it's letting the writer know, reassuring the writer that the way that she described the setting and the whole geography of where she was on the East Coast was very effective. Again, there was more things that happened. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that happens with characters, and this was a resolution. And it was so beautifully written, and it was emotional because there was so much transformation, but it wasn't cheesy. And she never told us, oh, I'm afraid my book is cheesy. We just knew, we could just tell that would give her that reassurance to know that it was emotional, it was great, but it was realistic, cathartic, and compelling. And that's what writers need to hear, especially if they do something well. We will focus on the hero's journey. We will discuss that. The main character in Lisa's book was Jade, and she had considered abandoning college. There was a lot of conflicting ideas, and Jarrett, when he wrote the manuscript evaluation, pinpointed those moments where that journey was completed. This is again in the resolution. The writer needs to know if they effectively completed that journey and that circle feels closed and resolved. So here, there was also one scene, I thought this would be interesting to talk about. There was like an altercation with something awkward with this bad guy. He was the annoying character and he assaulted a minor. And Jarrett wrote, this guy sucks. And he went back and forth on how realistic that scenario was. But, and he wanted her to know that his mind was kind of going back and forth. But then he took that moment to realize that it actually demonstrated the powerlessness that teenagers often feel in the hands of adults and the grown-up world. Then he had another point to add. He said, second, it demonstrates the corruption of the community that she lived in and the lengths to which bad guys are willing to go to get what they want. So how cool for a writer to see that Jarrett was very mindful. He thought about why that situation happened and was like, I don't know, is this realistic? But then thought, well, actually, you know what it is, and here's why. So why are these manuscript evaluations a game changer for writers? There are several reasons, but I'll highlight the top 3. I believe that manuscript evaluations are an amazing way to establish trust with your editor. The editor is out to help you, not out to get things from you. And it creates a really great professional relationship with your editor. The second main thing is that the report gives you a clearer path and should make you help you to feel less overwhelmed. It can be a very overwhelming process. There's a lot of moving parts when you get closer and closer to the publishing process and when you go through production. But you want to always make sure that at least one person out there is rooting for you and loved your story and got it to be the best that it can be. Also, to me, this is all one of the most important things, is that it helps authors find their voice, their personality, especially breakout writers. What is their style? Um, Sometimes writers think they know, but then they don't realize until a complete stranger comes in and does their alpha read and helps them say, "Oh, this is totally you." And then the writer is like, "Yeah, that is me. That is my personality." So it's kind of cool to go through that process as a writer. Um, I do have to say that the debrief process with our writers is so great. Once they've read through everything and they've received the report, the annotated Word doc, um, it should that it's a very powerful moment in that debrief, because now you're talking directly to the person who read the book, and the editor is helping the writer to feel inspired, encouraged, and determined to keep moving forward in the writing process. So that's everything I have today. I'd like to open it up for questions. If you have any questions about the manuscript evaluation process, you can visit my website at peakpublishing.com. I'm also on Instagram at the editor's half hour with underscores. And I post a lot of things about me, the podcast, my guests, and we cover a lot of territory in the publishing industry. So thank you. I'm ready for questions.
Thanks, Nadia. We do have a couple questions, and if anyone would like to add more questions, join us in the Dragon chat by clicking on the Discord link in the description of this video. I think you might have answered this earlier on. Oh, people are already typing. How finished does your manuscript have to be to get it evaluated?
You know, I would, if you are on a tight budget, it would be better to wait until it's as far as you could possibly get it, because you don't want to waste your money, you don't want to waste your time. If it's about, I will say this, I had a client come to me with only 10,000 words written, and he was stuck and didn't know what else to do. His book was published at 80,000 words, and I had to lead him down a path of book coaching sessions. So it's anywhere, I mean, you just have to take a step back and think about what you need as a writer. And if it's helpful for you to have that back and forth communication, like, "Hey, here's my draft. What do you think?" That would be a book coaching thing. If you are confident as a writer and you're like, "Okay, I'm at 50,000 words. I think I can go farther with this." By all means, do it. Get it as far as you possibly can. Maybe do writers groups, critiques, all of that. But then once it's, like I said, as far as you can get it, then that's prime time. Perfect for manuscript evaluations.
Okay. What if what you are looking for is what might be missing from your manuscript? Can you tell what that might be?
Well, then that's when you as a writer take that step back and you're like, "This is truly as far as I can take it." Then get it evaluated, and then you can find what those are. So I think it's really just when it kind of taps into the confidence of a writer. If the writer feels like, "Oh, I'm just not as confident about maybe the character development," or what if there's something I'm missing, those can be identified in the manuscript evaluation process. I don't, does that answer the question?
I think so. I think that does for me.
Okay.
How can writers find an editor who specializes in their genre to do a book evaluation?
A lot of editors are now starting to post wish lists on their websites. So if you type in editor, if you Google editor wish list sci-fi, editor wish list fantasy, and some editors are very specific on the things that they are just so into. And those are the best editors to work with, especially ones who are focused in sci-fi. I know some editors who only want to do sci-fi fantasy, so I can send referrals too. And oftentimes that happens in our industry. We're really great. Editors are great. We've got a wonderful community, and we all support each other. So if you meet somebody who can do romance, but they don't specialize in romance, they will be like, "You know what? Somebody who could do this." So referrals are really powerful, and they happen very often in the editorial community. So if you might meet one editor, it's okay to talk to another editor before you feel like you found the right fit for you.
I like that. I like that you all know each other well enough
Yeah.
to do that. Here's another question about editing. How do you go about interviewing an editor? What should you ask them? How can you tell if they're right for you in your book?
Oh my gosh, this question, it's so funny. I'm laughing because I am actually going to, in October, I'm actually giving a full presentation about this. I'm not going to launch into it. I'm still working on it. But in October, the title of the presentation is something like, "Help, I need an editor." How do you find the right editor? It can be very daunting and intimidating, and you're handing over something that you spent years of your life on, and somebody's about to rip it up, and it's not a good feeling. It's a scary feeling. And so if an editor doesn't put themselves in the shoes of a writer, then that's not the editor for you. That's how I feel. That's truly how I feel. I'm not a writer. Someday I hope to write a book. I probably would be sci-fi, honestly. I would definitely interview the editor and ask, have you done sci-fi books? Have you worked in sci-fi? I would ask questions about my concerns. And I briefly mentioned it on the PowerPoint slide where Lisa, my client, had a list of concerns. That's what you should do is put it back on yourself as a writer, focus on the things that you're concerned about, and talk about that with the editor. Who you interview as the editor, say, hey, I'm really worried about maybe the dialogue not being believable. The editor should be able to address those concerns and say, okay, I see, let me help you out, or this and that. The editor should be able to answer those. If the editor struggles well, I don't do that. Well, I only focus on grammar and punctuation because they only do copy editing. You could go back to them for copy editing, but ask them if they know somebody who can address these concerns that you might have.
How do you use this is for me. So how do you use a book evaluate or a manuscript evaluation when you're talking to an editor? Do you plop that down in front of them? What happens there?
Can you rephrase that? So what do you do with it when it's done?
So once you have it, and then you're taking this to shop around or to send to people and stuff. Do you use it just yourself, or do you actually use it as a tool to show people things?
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. The purpose of it is really to help just that writer, the writer to make adjustments to their novel. It helps the writer think about things that they hadn't considered. So it's really just a thing between the writer and editor. But then what's next is what's next? Like who's gonna, fix these plot holes, or who's gonna develop? Like it's the writer. So it's really for the writer to go back and redo those quote unquote rewrites if they're required. Sometimes in nonfiction, I've had writers who don't have the time but have the budget, and they're like, well, I agree with everything you did. Okay, you do it. And I'm like, what? I'm doing this. So then I actually will take it back. I give them a quote, and it kind of turned in, it went down that path of ghostwriting where on my team, we made those adjustments that we had listed in the suggestions. So that has happened only once. It doesn't happen all the time, but we did have to go back and fix the quote unquote fix, but make those adjustments for the writer who was retirement age, didn't have the time or the energy to do it.
I see.
Yeah. But then we have taken though that manuscript evaluation. We have that disclaimer on there that says it's just the opinions of whoever did it. We do share it with a copy editor, so the copy editor is mindful of what changes have happened in the manuscript before they actually go through the deep, editorial process there.
I think that's kind of what I was asking about there.
Yeah.
Although, if I got a really good feedback note about a big wow moment, I think I would just frame that and just take it with me everywhere and just show people.
Like, it's really good. Look what you said.
I promise it's good.
This book is really good. You got to see what this editor said. I mean, it's kind of could be like a brag piece.
Yeah.
If you ask the editor, because there are some major compliments that we give our writers, the writer could quote the editor if they wanted on their website. You just ask the editor for permission. But yeah, there's some powerful things that are written in these evaluations.
That's good.
Sure.
Ashley would like to know if you could tell us a little about your podcast.
Oh, sure. So my podcast, like I mentioned earlier, I started it. I didn't really think too much about it. I just really wanted to do it. I'm like, I just want to interview these experts. And when I was president of the San Diego Editors Network, when we had program meetings, I kept asking the presenters interview style questions. So that means like it wasn't content specific to what they were really addressing in the presentations. It was like, how did it feel when something went wrong? And I wanted the juice. I started getting really into it. And then after my term ended, I was like, oh, I kind of miss those conversations with the program or the presenters. And I thought I just really want to just get them in a room and just ask them how they got to how they got to where they are. What do they struggle with? What do experts struggle with, right? And so really tapping into that editorial mind. And I did it through the podcast. So that's what the podcast is about. It's about what is the day in the life of an editor who edits cookbooks. Like what? I don't edit cookbooks all the time. So that is so intriguing to me, to the point where I'm like, I'm totally going to do a podcast to talk to all of these editors who specialize in these niche areas. And that is, by the way, an upcoming episode. I haven't recorded it yet. But later this year, we're going to talk to an editor who does cookbooks. So that's a lot of writers will listen in. It's not for writers per se, but writers can learn a lot about what editors talk about. It's kind of interesting in that way.
I like that they could get a little sneak peek behind the curtain.
Yeah, it's exactly what it
Sure.
is.
Well, thank you very much, Nadia. We appreciate you being with us here today. And for anybody that needs to find you one more time, tell us where you're at.
So the best place to find me is either on Instagram. I mean, I'm on all different social media platforms, LinkedIn. But I think the two that I'm on the most is Instagram for Editors Half Hour. And on the website, there's a contact form and it goes straight to my inbox. So visit the website. It's Peak Publishing, PIQUE publishing.com. Those are the two best ways to reach me.
Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. And we hope that you join us again in February on the 13th through the 15th in Provo for our live LTUE conference. Thanks again, Nadia. And thanks everybody. We will see you then.
Thank you.